Maharaj told me that this session proper starts at 11:40. But before that, may I just make some introductory remarks about the two speakers so that they have more time for their presentation. So the first speaker today would be Dr. Ramakrishna Bhattacharya. He has taught at Anandamohan College and also at University of Calcutta as a guest lecturer. The interesting point is that by profession he was the professor of English. But for the last decade, or maybe even for more than that, he has been working tirelessly on Lokayata system of philosophy here. And his main, what distinguishes his work from others is that he would spend the time and energy on a 4-page article that others would normally devote to a 400-page book. So the papers are very brief, but they're very important and path-breaking. And today also he would give a talk here on materialism in Europe and in India. And I am certain that we'll be much benefited from his talk. Many of his papers have been published in different journals, but if I am not wrong, a collection of his writings has come out from Florence, and maybe other anthologies are they in the making or
in the making?
Yeah. So we may also expect some other anthologies that may enrich us, at least our knowledge about the Lokayata system and various problems connected to it. The second speaker would be Professor V.N. Sheshagiri Rao of Mysore University, and he would be speaking on Sister Nivedita's humanistic interpretation of Swami Vivekananda. As far as I know, his main area of interest is Vedanta. At least the first time I saw him in Delhi, he delivered the Pratap Seth Memorial Lecture on Vedanta. And yesterday we had some discussion about Sister Nivedita, their relation to Sri Aurobindo and other things. But today it will be more of an, today's paper would be a bit different, that how Sister Nivedita interpreted the philosophy of Swami Vivekananda. And I think now it's just 11:40 by this clock. So without further delay, may I request Professor Bhattacharya to present his paper.
Thank you, sir. Experience has taught me first to clarify the two words materialism and idealism. In common parlance and in common man's understanding, materialism always stands for sensual gratification. But in philosophy, as a technical term, it has got nothing to do with it. Similarly, with idealism, it is generally translated in Bangla, for example, and perhaps also in some northern Indian languages as Adorshovad. But that has got nothing to do with the philosophical implication as used in English and other languages, mostly French. Though the words idealism and materialism were not coined before the 18th century, as late as, there has been a group of idealist philosophers as also materialist philosophers, mostly in two countries, China excluded, India and Greece. China excluded because, as some witty man has said, it was a discovery of Mao Zedong. Materialism as a philosophical system really didn't develop in China. Actually, though there was a chapter on, or a section on, materialism in China in the Hastings Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics, in modern encyclopedias of philosophy, you will never find any entry of materialism in China. Idealism in China, yes. So, in modern encyclopedias like Routledge Encyclopedia of Philosophy or just encyclopedia of philosophy of any publisher, you will find the entry on materialism, the Indian school of. But actually, it should be Indian schools of. For taking matter as the starting point, not consciousness or God or any creator being, materialism stands for a doctrine that starts with matter as the basic point of departure. Whereas in other philosophical systems, which are called idealist, it is consciousness in whatever form you speak of it, spirit, soul, etc., or the self even, that becomes the focal point. Here is the difference between the common man's understanding of the two words and the technical signification of the two. With this introductory remark, I'll start with the idea of how materialism came to be known to the world, first through Henry Thomas Colebrooke's essay. Originally it was a lecture delivered in the Royal Asiatic Society in 1827, but published later in his miscellaneous essays in 1837, that a few examples, mostly aphorisms or indirect references to a doctrine that was against the idea of the other world, paraloka, against the existence of God, but that is nothing unique. God was never a very significant part of Indian philosophy proper. There have been idealists who did not believe in God. And most importantly, the denial of the idea of rebirth and karmic results. This is where Indian materialism differs from materialism of Greece. Greece started with matter and the elements that they thought of. By delving deeper, Thales spoke of water as the source of all beings. Similarly, there were theories about fire, Heraclitus being the propounder. Then there were people who spoke of air and also of other elements. The Greeks were four elementalists. They did not accept space or akasho or bomo as a special element. In the Indian tradition, however, we always spoke originally of Panchabhutas, the five elements: earth, air, fire, water, and space. Now, as to materialism, the earlier materialist schools or individual thinkers spoke of these five along with the idealists. But it was around the 8th century CE. You must excuse my expression around because there is no way of dating exactly. It was around the 8th century CE, it is Common Era, that the four elementalists came into being. They were known as the Charvakos, mostly used in plural. And it will be interesting to observe that the word Charvako has now become a generic term. It has become a name for materialism as such. So Bronkhorst has discovered a Charvako in the Mahabharata, not the same demon who was a friend of Duryodhana. It was a philosopher whom he calls a Charvako, but actually he is a pre-Charvako materialist. The Charvakos did not appear on the scene before the 8th century. Now these early distinctions were not made before, and there were some misunderstandings as well. When Wilson translated the Vishnu Purana and Muir wrote his article on these aspects of non-idealist thinking, they took a passage in the Vishnu Purana, book 3, chapter 18, as a typical exposition of the Charvako doctrine. Actually, a closer study would reveal that those verses which are attributed to the character called Mahamoho, the great delusion, in the Vishnu Purana, is speaking very much like the Buddhists and the Jains. There is nothing specifically materialist in it. They spoke against the two mainstays of Brahmanism. One is yajna, sacrifice. They found no utility in performing sacrifices. particularly because it involved eating flesh and drinking wine, as in the Shotravani Yaga. And second, the observance of Sraddho, the post-mortem rites for the ancestors. These were the two ideas that were ridiculed in pithy epigrams written by either the Buddhists or the Jains or both. Only two verses appended to the first chapter of Sarvadarshana Sangraha by Sayana Madhava, you know, a doxographical work. Only two verses can be called materialist in content because it denies the other world. Nasti paralokaha. Otherwise, all the verses could have emanated. I would even go one step farther and say must have emanated from the Buddhist and Jain circles, because such verses are also found in other Buddhist and Jain works. Unfortunately, as to the Charvakos or even the pre-Charvakos, no single whole text has survived. Sometimes Jayarashi Bhatto's Tattvapaplava Singha, the lion to unsettle all principles, tattvas, actually he demolishes the very concept of pramana, the means of knowledge, or to use more gracious terms, instruments of cognition. But he was not a Charvako. At the end of the work, he specifically states that it was the purpose of his to demolish the Pashandas or Pakhandas. Now this is a term which has many meanings, but basically it means heretics. And the Charvakos were anything but heretics, Nastikas. Sarvadarshana Siromani calls him, Sarvadarshana Sangraha calls him Nastiko Siromani, the crest jewel of the naysayers, nine zagers. So, leaving aside Tattvapaplava Singha, the other works that have come are mere fragments. Fragments from the sutra works, the base text, fragments from the commentaries, and there were no fewer than 5 commentators known to us. And there are a few verses, epigrams of exceptional quality, satirical to its best, that have come down to be known as Charvako verses. But all of them could not have been so. This was the time, that is from 1837, that the materialist philosophy in India was branded by Colebrook, later by Wilson, and then by Muir. What was the first name of Muir? What was the first name of Muir? Christian?
J. Muir.
John Muir. John Muir. But the real breakthrough came with the publication of the Sarvadarshana Sangraha, the Editio Princeps, the first printed edition, edited by, the name might appear strange to you most, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. He edited the first fascicule in 1853, and it was from then, from the first chapter, that the essence of the materialist philosophy was known. The chapter had the heading Charvaka Darshana, and so that the Charvaka was a Darshana was already known and established by the 14th century. There can be no denial of it. The chapter was immediately translated into German in the Journal of the German Oriental Society, and that's how, by the French translation and other English translations published by Cowell and Goff, the Charvaka Darshana came to be known as a specific feature, the negative arm, as Cowell said, of the idealist philosophical systems in India. There was a parallel tradition in the Buddhist literature also. It is called Uchchedavada, the doctrine of annihilation, which was propounded by Ajita Kesa Kambala. The name is very interesting. A man with a hair blanket. Why hair blanket? Perhaps he believed in performing a kind of what is today's term you might call Krishna Sadhana.
Penance.
Penance, not penance exactly.
Penance.
Performing austerities. That would be the nearest understanding. And this Kombolo word is more interesting because there is a commentator of the Charvaka Sutra whose name is given as Kombolashvatara. There is no relation between the two names, as or Bhattacharya, another Bhattacharya, B. Bhattacharya. The names I forget. Harprasad Shastri's son. No, not Binoy-Tosh Bhattacharya surmised there is absolutely no ground to believe that the two Kambalas are the same. But such things as these established not only identity but also the very strong existence of the materialist philosophers in India. But a question had always been raised, first perhaps by Louis de la Vallapousa, the French savant, in 1915, in his article in the Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics, whether the Charbakos was a school of philosophy or a loose band of freethinkers who did not believe in the other world, in karmic retribution, in rebirth, and in God. Or they constituted a philosophical school by themselves. First indented indented quotation. When the texts were first available, then came a few other texts from Buddhist and Jain tradition. The most important text was Shantarakshita's famous doxological work, which was also polemical in intent, Tattva Sangraha, with its commentary by Kamalashila, Tattva Sangraha Panjika. These two works had two chapters, one on the Lokayata Pariksha and the other on Sabhavavada. There has been a tendency to equate both for a long time, but it can be shown, and it has been shown, that Sabhavavada developed as a separate doctrine. The most famous occurrence of the separate existence of the two doctrines can be found in the Shetashvatara Upanishad. Here also you will find the peculiar word Ashvatara, like Kamvalashvatara. But as it stands, the verse speaks of Kalo, time, Swabhava, word being, loosely translated as nature, Niyati, destiny, Yadicha, accident, Kalo, Swabhava, Niyati, Yadicha, Bhutani, and Prakriti, Joni. The words had to be interpreted in tortuous manners by the commentators as also by the translators. Whether Joni should mean the cause, the root, or it would refer to Shankho, the Prakriti Purusha Darshana. But two separate mentions of Swabhava and Bhutani. Again, Bhutani is a prax, whether it was 4 bhutas or 5 bhutas, but plural in any case. The two separate mention of Swabhava and Bhutani should compel us to believe that they were two different doctrines. They, however, sometimes in particular occasions coalesced, perhaps after the 7th century CE. And thus the doctrine of Swabhava and Bhutavada came to be accepted as one and the same. All these are of course surmises, conjectures. They cannot be proved with any certainty. But the conjectures are not altogether baseless. They have their own ideas behind them, which are properly understood and can be separated as and when necessary. Now, as to idealism and materialism in the European tradition, our good friend Johannes Bronkhorst has expressed his doubt, as has Pradeep Gokhale, another friend who also thinks, like Louis de la Vallapousa, that the Charbako was not a philosophy, not a philosophical school either, but a band of freethinkers, as I said. And how to distinguish between the two in two traditions? Johannes Bronkhorst quotes from Walter Ruben and Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay, two Marxist historians who had made materialism as a part of the Charbako Lokayata doctrine, the very basis, the plank of the Charbako Lokayata philosophy. But in the European tradition, in the West, particularly in ancient Greece and later in modern Europe, there were some basic differences. The locus classicus, the mainstay of the Marxist approach, was clearly stated by Engels in his work on Ludwig Feuerbach and the end of classical German philosophy. I quote, "The great basic question of all philosophy, especially of modern philosophy, is that concerning the relation of thinking and being. From the very early times when man came to believe that their thinking and sensation were not activities of their bodies, but of a distinct soul which inhabits the body and leaves it at death." There is a spelling mistake here. The question of the position of thinking in relation to being, a question which, by the way, had played a great part also in scholasticism of the Middle Ages, the question which is primarily spirit or nature, that question in relation to the church was serpented into this: did God create the world, or has the world been in existence? The answer which the philosophers gave to this question split them into two great camps. Those who asserted the primacy of spirit to nature, and therefore in the last instance assumed world creation in some form or other, comprised the camp of idealism. The others, who regarded nature as primary, belonged to the various schools of materialism. Now this is a very clear exposition, and it is supposed to be valid for all countries at all ages. We must add a few proviso here. Lenin, who was basically a philosopher, made a proviso from common sense that between the two, idealism and materialism, there must be a gray area. Agnosticism. Hume, who would neither commit to materialism or to idealism. And another Marxist philosopher, Georg Lukács of Hungary, who mostly used to write in German, made a separate, or what he called different polarity, namely the struggle between rational and irrational philosophy. There were both materialists and idealists among the rationalists, although the irrational philosophy was altogether idealistic. But the basic question is, God is never so important in the Indian philosophical tradition. The Shankho, the early Nyo, and there are some other traditions also which dispense with God but remain idealist still. In India, of course, it was the question of the other world, of rebirth and karmic retribution, that occupy the center stage in the struggle between idealism and materialism. This is the first distinction that has to be kept in mind, that there is a special variety of materialism in India, which is not the same as in Europe. Mimamsa, for example, was a philosophy which believed in the Vedas, but did not believe in any personal God or even gods. The tradition may appear to be rather strange, highly controversial to the European thinkers, but in India, we can easily accept it because the Veda was considered to be the source and the greatest means of knowledge. Shabda, word, verbal testimony. And that's how in several schools of Indian philosophy, along with perception and inference, Shabdo, verbal testimony, is considered to be a means of knowledge. And the Veda being the word of words, the source of all aptavakos or all sayings which can be regarded as true without raising any question. Now, the Charvakos or even pre-Charvakos raised doubt about the validity of the Veda. They did not consider the Veda to be infallible and something to be followed blindly. This was also another feature of materialism in India that marks it different from the European tradition. Of course, in the Middle Ages, the Bible and Aristotle, they were considered to be infallible, and everything was judged in accordance with what the Bible or the master of all those who know, Aristotle had said. But things did not remain there, and it had never been so before. But in the Indian tradition, it was this allegiance to the Veda that came to be known as the touchstone. And that is how Shankho, which did not believe in God, still believed in the infallibility of the Veda. And that is how, even though Ishvara was Asiddhya, as a famous aphorism of the late work, Shankha Pravachana Sutra says, Ishvara Siddhe Pramana Bhavat. Two different aphorisms, but combined by Bankim Chandra in his famous novel, Devi Chaudhurani. The Veda was considered to be the final judgment, the arbiter, whether or not you believed in the infallibility of the Veda or not. Infallibility here also stands for Pramanya, as the greatest instrument of cognition, or perhaps, if not the greatest, on a par with perception and inference. This is not to be found in the European tradition. What is the basic tenet of idealism and materialism in the European tradition? There is nothing to do with the Veda, there is nothing to do with the other world, there is nothing to do with rebirth, there is nothing to do with karmic retribution. Anatole France, a French novelist, has made the distinction quite clear in a passage in a novel. Let me quote. We formed ourselves into two opposing camps. One camp maintained that before there were apples, there was the apple. That before there were popinjays, there was the popinjay. That before there were lewd and greedy monks, there was the monk. Lewdness and greed. That before there was feet and before there were posteriors in this world, the kick in the posterior must have an existence for all eternity in the bosom of God. The other camp replied that on the contrary, apples gave man the idea of the apple, popinjays the idea of the popinjay, monks the idea of the monk, greed and lewdness, and that the kick in the posterior existence only after moving being duly given and received. The players grew heated and came to fisticuffs. I was an adherent of the second party, which satisfied my reason better, and such was in fact condemned by the Council of Soissons. This is how the European tradition developed, quite different from the Indian tradition. Now that would lead to a question, why call them materialism at the same time? If the distinction is to be made in terms of which comes first, consciousness or matter, or the concept of the apple coming first or apples coming first. That is one way of looking at things. But the other school, as it developed in India, or schools, which deals with the other world, the karmic retribution, rebirth, and the Veda, what is common to both of them? So that we call them materialism both. This is where I think the southern Indian tradition will be of more help than any other tradition. Perhaps most of you don't know, I'm pretty sure because I did not know it before, say, 3 years. In South India, there has been a tradition of philosophical materialism as well as idealism long before they were developed in the north. The ideas perhaps came from north to the south. The famous story of Augusto Yatra may have some truth behind it. Whether Chandragupta Maurya was a Jaina and he had sent his emissaries there is a debatable question. But there are two epics. They call them epics. They are really long narratives. One is called the Manimekalai in Tamil, Old Tamil, and the other is Nilakeshi. The Nilakeshi was previously considered to be earlier than Shankara because it does not mention Vedanta or Advaita Vedanta, the non-dualist Vedanta. But later research has found that it must have been in existence from the 10th century. And the Munimekolai is pretty older, 6th or 7th century. These are all conjectural datings, as you can understand. So let us not be very orthodox about dating. But in these two epics, we know of two materialist doctrines. One is called Bhutovada, which is an exact translation of materialism. Elementalism would be better perhaps. And the other mentioned is Lokayata. The word Charvaku is not found there, which is another evidence that the Charvakos as a separate group did not come into being before the 8th century. And from the 8th century onwards, we have four names interplaying: Charvaka, Lokayata, Nastiko, and Bharashpata. Hemachandra, the omniscient one of the Koli era, Kalikala Sarvajiniya, spoke of these four in his dictionary, Abhidhana Chintamani. The four names of the same doctrine. And if we combine all this evidence, it will come out that the Indian tradition did not, I repeat, did not consider matter to be secondary. It was quite original in their approach that matter is behind everything. Unless there is matter, there can be no consciousness. Unless there is the brain, there can be no thinking. Unless there is a body, there can be no feeling. That is how the materiality of the world came to be recognized early in the materialist tradition in India. And the southern Indian tradition helps us a lot to comprehend how these two traditions ultimately, I say ultimately, coalesced to form the Charvako Darshana. There are enough epigraphic evidence to show that the Charvakos were considered a group of philosophers who could be treated on a par with Mimamsa and Shankho and Nyaya-Vaisheshiko and the like. Similarly, parallel to the concepts of Astiko and Nastiko, the yes-sayers and no-sayers, there was another division called Shat Turki, 6 philosophical systems based on one argument and the other not on arguments. This is where also the materialists, whether in the form of the name of Charvako or Lokayato, find their place. So, materiality was as much a part of the Indian tradition as in the European tradition. And that is how it is quite justified to treat the materialist schools in India, right from Uddalaka Varuni down to the Charvakos, as representatives of a materialist traditions with some differences between them. As we think of the Greek philosophers in the same way, of Heraclitus or Miletus of Athens, Thales of Miletus, Anaximenes and the others, were individual philosophers who perhaps had a following, who perhaps had not, but they too believed in the materiality of the world, and that is how they tried to explain it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya, for your informative talk, and even more so for finishing the paper even before the allotted time, which leaves some scope for further questions in this session, I hope. And as in the first session, the 2 papers were read and then questions were asked. I think that helps in keeping the time schedule. So may I now request Professor Sheshagiri Rao to present his paper.
You can go up to 1 o'clock.
This is no 40 minutes. Yeah.
1 o'clock.
Yeah. No, not up to 1. So it would be
1:50.
Yeah, 12:50.
I'm certain.
Younger man prefers to stand and speak. তাই বলছি রিটায়ার্ড তো আমরাও।
Ananta Kalyana Gunaika Rashim Ashesha Doshojitam Aprameyam Mumukshubhihi Sevyam Ananta Sokhyapradam Ramesham Pranamami Nityam. At the outset, I offer my salutations to the great Almighty who has enabled me to stand before you. Through my parents, revered parents, dear teachers, and the spiritual trio, Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Sharadama, Sri Swami Vivekananda, and to the fountain of inspiration, Sister Nivedita. I am also beholden to Srimad Swami Suparnananda Maharaj, Srimad Pragnatmananda Maharaj, Professor Prabal Kumar Sen, and the authorities of the Sri Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture for giving me this opportunity to stand before you and to share with you what little I know. It also gives me great pleasure to remember that my teacher, Professor S.S. Raghavachar, spoke on the aspects of bhakti and image worship in this great institute of learning in 1976 or so. When revered Srimad Lokeshwaranandaji was in charge of the institute. I was a student then doing MA Philosophy from the Mysore University, where stalwarts like M. Hiriyanna, author of Outlines of Indian Philosophy, Essentials of Philosophy, Art Experience, Indian Philosophical Studies, a great scholar. In fact, it is M. Hiriyanna. M is not expanded. It is Mysore Hiriyanna. And Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. He wrote the philosophy of Rabindranath Tagore when he was Professor of Philosophy in Mysore University from 1918 to 1921. And later, as we know, he became the President of India. And one more thing, Professor Brajendranath Seal, a great Bengali scholar, he was our Vice Chancellor for 9 long years, from 1921 to 1930, and his famous book, Positive Sciences of the Ancient Hindus, very well-known book. And I am happy to be here, coming to my paper. My paper is on Sister Nivedita's humanistic interpretation of Swami Vivekananda, a reprisal. So here I briefly touch upon Swami Vivekananda, touch upon Sister Nivedita, touch upon humanism, and I will try to explain as far as possible all the points, and many have contributed their might to the development and reconstruction of modern India in its various ramifications, political, social, religious, educational, intellectual. I don't know I will be able to cover all these ramifications. Anyway, I will try to summarize briefly. Amongst them, the names of Swami Vivekananda and Sister Nivedita stand supreme. Yes, philosophy is the mother source of all branches of knowledge. Everyone has to return to philosophy. It is an invitation to thorough searching enquiry. whether one does research in computer science or technology or this or that, the degree given by the universities is PhD. PhD means, as we all know, Doctor of Philosophy. That means going deep into the problem. Philosophy is not superficial thinking. It is going deep into the roots. Swami Vivekananda was a philosopher of repute. He studied philosophy at BA in a famous college in Calcutta. He was convinced Advaitin. He was a convinced Advaitin. The gist of Advaita Vedanta was openly expressed by sage Yajnavalkya in his Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And it was effectively taught by Gaudapada, the grand teacher of Adi Shankara, Govinda Bhagavatpada, the teacher of Shankara, and of course Adi Shankara. So it was effectively taught by these great minds. Now, a half verse summarizes the whole of Advaita. Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. Brahma Satyam, Brahman alone is real. Brahman alone is real. Jagan Mithya, the world is an appearance. The world is Mithya, Maya. And the Jiva, the individual self, me, sitting here in this august hall, in essence, are not different from Brahman. So what is this Brahman? As we all know, it is Sat, existence. It is Chit, consciousness. It is Ananda. It is bliss, Satchidananda. Brahman is Satchidananda. So, in essence, we are that. Vivekananda said, every jiva is Shiva. Every jiva is Shiva. Aham Brahmasmi is one of the Mahavakyas of the Upanishads. I am Brahman. I am Brahman. So if I am Brahman, if my nature is Sat, I exist always. I am now, I was, I will be. I am consciousness, Chit. I am bliss, blissful in nature. Why there is suffering? Why I am undergoing pain? Now the answer given by Advaita Vedanta is because of wrong association of soul with body. It is called adhyasa, superimposition. We superimpose self on the body and also body on the self. There is mutual superimposition. Because of the association of the self with the body, there is all suffering. Now, this self is spiritual, self is non-physical, and body is physical. As we know, Gita says, self cannot be destroyed. It is avinashi. It is without parts. It is akhanda. And it is of the nature of consciousness. Look at the body. Body is made out of parts. Body can be cut into pieces, but not the self. With any weapon we cannot cut. It cannot be cut because it is partless. It is not made out of parts. Self. So Gita says, Nainam chindanti shastrani, Nainam dahati pavakaha. It cannot be cut by any weapon. That means it is indestructible. It cannot be made wet by water. It cannot be burned by fire. All this shows that it is a spiritual entity and there is no death as far as the spiritual entity is concerned. There is no nasha, there is no destruction. We have all DOB, date of birth. We also have DOD, date of death, but we do not know that. We know our date of birth. Now what is this date of birth? The body the self associating itself with the body, and the body coming from, and this complex coming from the womb of our mothers. Now, this wrong identification, self is something non-physical, body is something physical. There has been a wrong identification, tadatmya. Now, at the same time, Vivekananda says, the Western interpretation of spirituality and the Indian interpretation of spirituality differ. He puts it in a very nice way. He was the master of English language, Narendranath Datta, who later became Vivekananda. He says, the Indian view is that man is a soul and has a body. The Western view is that man is a body and has a soul. So, because of the wrong identification, we are undergoing suffering. We are suffering. Now, can we avoid this wrong identification? No, because it is naisargikoyam loka vyavaharaha. In the Adhyasa Bhashya, Adi Shankara writes, this wrong identification of the body and self is natural. We cannot ask why we are hungry. The nature of body is that food has to be given to that. It is naisargikoyam, natural, and loka vyavaharaha. You see, I am tall, I am short, I am fat, I am thin. Now, these statements do not strictly refer to the self, because self is sizeless. It has no shape. So it refers to this wrong identification. I am tall, my body is tall, and inside my body there is the self. Okay, so this wrong identification is the cause of all misery. Now, could this wrong identification be overcome, removed? Yes. This wrong identification is because of ignorance, because of nescience, because of avidya, ajnana. Now, by jnana, through jnana, we can remove it. The jnana is that I am Brahman, ajnana is that I am the body, I am. So, through knowledge we can remove this, and this is about Brahman and Jivatma. Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya. I will come to Jagan Mithya later. Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. This Jiva, the individual self, in essence is not different from Brahman. How is it that we feel different? How is it that I feel different from you, you feel different from me and others? It is because of the upadhi. It is because of the adjunct, the sense organs, the anthakarana, internal organ. The body itself is a great upadhi. So, in us, bodies are different. Atman, our self, has no sex. It is the body which makes us female, male. Therefore, this self, in its very essence, is Brahman, and we should realize that. It is not different from Brahman. Na paraha. Now, what is this Jagat? What is this world? Shankara has a beautiful presentation. It is not pure Sat. It is not pure existence, because the only pure existence is Brahman. Can it be pure non-existence? Asat. Sampurna Asat. Purna Asat. For example, in the morning, Professor Rupa was referring, the son of a barren woman, hare's horn. See? And Gagana Kusuma. There is no, have you seen Gagana Kusuma? No, because there is no such thing as Gagana Kusuma. We have seen jasmine, we have seen rose and other things, but not Gagana Kusuma, because there is no such thing. It is pure, an example for pure non-existence. Similarly, Vandhyaputra, son of a barren woman. It is a contradiction in terms. If she is barren, there cannot be the son. If there is son, she cannot be barren. Isn't it? Son of a barren woman, hare's horn. No? The ears of the hare look like the horn, isn't it? So, this Jagat, this world, is neither Sat, pure existence, nor Asat, pure non-existence. Can it be both Sat and Asat? No, because it violates the law of contradiction. Then what is it? What is the nature of this world? Shankara says, it is different from both Sat and Asat. It is Sad Asad Vilakshana. It is Durnirupa. So, this is the world. People think that when Shankara says Maya is, world is Maya, people think that world is an illusion, it is not a fit place to live in. No. What he is saying, it has no ontological status. Only Brahman has the ontological status. Therefore, in this world we are living, and Vivekananda popularized this Vedanta in the West. He spoke on the parliament, in the Parliament of Religions in 1893 September, and the whole world came to know the truths of Vedanta. So, he was a practical Vedantin. Vedanta earlier was confined to caves, forests. He brought them from caves, forests, and he made us to live Vedanta. Vedanta is there to be lived, not to be simply theoretically discussed, as we have been doing. So, this is what is called practical Vedanta, Anusthana Vedanta. So, coming to humanism. What is this humanism? Humanism is a doctrine for which welfare of human beings is most important. Nothing else. Welfare of human beings. Sister Nivedita stood for social justice, equality, liberty, fraternity, and knowledge, and value considerations. She really cared for humanistic values and objectives. Her humanism has an all or one attitude. All or one attitude. Now, of course, she was influenced by Swami Vivekananda in holding this view. Her humanism is an all or one attitude and brotherhood of all human beings. She believed in creating a prosperous, happier, and better society. She set before herself progress, constant progress, to remove inequality, repression, exploitation of women. I will come to that point if time permits. Ignorance, fear. She was for positive self-reliance. She was for knowledge and harmony and peace. In other words, like her mentor, Nivedita was applied humanist. M.N. Roy's humanism is there. Humanism of different thinkers is there. But her humanism may be termed as applied humanism. She applied it to the society. So, for preaching humanism, this is a special characteristic of Sister Nivedita. She made science as the basis of her thinking. She was science-oriented. She was rational in her approach. So she took guidance and inspiration from science. Humanism teaches that every human being, no matter how poor or unfortunate, is worthy of respect and freedom. So, Sister Nivedita's popularity is quite understandable. She was Swami Vivekananda's spiritual daughter, Manasa Putri. As is well known, Swami Vivekananda's words of courage, strength and hope roused every Indian. Swami Vivekananda was a great nationalist. patriot and a revolutionary educationist. He was a scholar of outstanding merit and erudition. He brought glory and fame and prestige to Hinduism at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893 September. All this we know. But we should know his knowledge. He had an unimpeachable knowledge of Western philosophy. He was well versed in Kant, Hegel, and other Western philosophers. His understanding of Indian philosophy was precise. He had enviable mastery over the English language. Just now, I told his interpretation of Indian spirituality, Western spirituality like that. And regarding Maya, he says, he differs from the classical Advaita. He says, Maya is not a theory, Maya is not a hypothesis, it is just a simple statement of facts, what we are and what is going around us. He gives very beautiful examples in fine English, good English. Empires come and go, cities rise and fall, the sinner dies, the saint dies, the king dies, the beggar dies. The whole world is marching towards destruction. Yet we think, yet we cling to life. We do not know why we cling to life. We think that we are not going to die. Our behavior sometimes shows that we are not going to die. So, the whole world is marching towards destruction, but somehow we think that, somehow we cling to life. And this cannot be explained. Why we cling to life? This is Maya. Similarly, he gives another example of a mother nursing her child. Child becomes an adolescent. She beats and ill-treats the mother. He beats and ill-treats the mother. Mother undergoes great pain, but she is not prepared to give up him. Somehow she covers the pain she is undergoing, suffering she is undergoing, and she is simply attached to the son, even though she is harmed by the son. Why it is so? Why it is so? This cannot be explained, and this is Maya. So his English 150 years ago was so fine that we don't talk such English now. So Rabindranath Tagore says, in Vivekananda, everything is positive and nothing is negative. Nothing is negative. So Vivekananda was a man of remarkable ability and commendable thoroughness. Sister Nivedita was very much influenced by the above knowledge and excellence of Swami Vivekananda. She was moved by the life and the humanistic teachings of Swami Vivekananda. And about Sister Nivedita, yesterday the biographical sketch has been done. I will just give a sweeping summary. As a backdrop to her services to Indian society, a short biographical note may not be out of place here. She came from a poor family. We must note that. She came from a poor family, but noble Scottish family living in Ireland. It was a family of pinching penury. Look at the plight of the poor girl. Food and shelter, the two formidable problems, haunted her. Her father was Samuel Richmond, noble, a poet, an orator, and a priest in a local church. And he died at the age of 32. Right from her childhood and adolescence, she entertained a strong desire to visit India, to know more about its ground realities, its spiritual tradition, etc. Unknowingly, she developed infinite love for India. Service-mindedness and intense human feeling were her born traits. She ably completed, in spite of her poverty, in spite of her difficulty, she ably completed education and joined as teacher in 1884, and she taught for some time, and she met Vivekananda after his whirlwind awakening tour of America. In London she meets. All that I will not tell you because you know all that. And she attends his lectures on Vedanta, on yoga, on Gita. And to start with, like Narendra, she was not prepared to accept anything and everything that is said by a person, however great he may be. You know, when Ramakrishna told, when Vivekananda, when Narendra met Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, you know, he thought in himself, my principal William Hasty has sent me to a madman. Huh? No, he was such a rationalist. Because, you know, Paramahamsa appeared mad, he was really mad. He was mad after God, mad after spiritual entities, spiritualism. So, like her mentor, she was a rationalist, and Vivekananda, she requested Vivekananda that she will visit India, that she will serve the people of India, and Vivekananda did not accept her. All on a sudden, immediately, he gave testing doses, and after he was convinced that she is really sincere and could serve the people of India, he invited her, and he gave Brahmacharini Diksha, spinstership ceremony, to her, and she had by then met Sri Mata and took her blessings and made a resolve to serve India. Nivedita's persuasive power, tact, was happily noticed by Sri Mata. Nivedita considered her Diksha day as her birthday. Yes, she was also interested, keen on taking Sannyasa Diksha, and Vivekananda gave that Sannyasa Diksha to her in America. Yes. Now, regarding her patriotism and nationalism, yesterday also we heard from Professor Indrani Sanyal and others. She was an artist, and she was the friend of Ananda Kumaraswamy, the great artist. So the function of art in shaping nationality is immense. Insatiable curiosity and creativity is in the secret of art. Art is charged with a special message, the message of nationality. So, she says art must be luminous. For this I have followed complete works of Sister Nivedita in 4 volumes. Whenever I quote from those volumes. And she also talks of cosmo-nationality, not only nationality. And this cosmo-nationality of thought and conduct is not easy. Cosmo-nationality consists, she says, in holding the local idea in the world idea. This is from her volume 3, page 515. So, Vivekananda proclaimed, my India, the India internal. My India, the India eternal. Amar Bharat, Amar Bharat. That was his slogan. He called India as Punya Bhumi, the sacred land, the merited land. Praising her mentor's fiery patriotism, Sister Nivedita adds in return that India is the queen of Shiva adoration. Like that it goes on. India is full of jewels. All that is needed is man to pick them up. Says Ananda Kumaraswamy, the renowned man of letters who had known Sister Nivedita intimately and worked with her in the task of nation building. Complete Works, volume 3, page 52. Sentiments of Swadeshi were also plenty in the air. They added to the stir in men the sentiments of humanity. Vivekananda's feeling of love and respect for India, Sister Nivedita's feeling of love and respect for India and her people was superb. She says that she came to India to speak as Vivekananda's disciple and daughter. She ultimately traces sense of patriotism to the trio, spiritual trio. We are all under the spell of patriotism created by the trio, Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Sharadama, Sri Swami Vivekananda. Sister Nivedita added her own enthusiasm to this with her extraordinary mental powers, power of clarity, constructive talents, ideals and voice. We are told her voice was very, very effective, very clear. Her speeches induced fervent patriotism in the minds of the youth and the sundry. Young youth's sense of nationalism went up. After listening to her spirited lectures, she says, even a journey round the West becomes a pilgrimage if one makes it with the Guru. That was her devotion to the Guru. And she was very much attracted by Vivekananda's statement, the spirit behind an act is more powerful than the act itself. This sentence touched her very much. After this, she recognized the heroic fiber of Swami Vivekananda. Yes. And a journalist of 23 years old, a young man, goes to Nivedita and asks her, what can I do for my country? And that young man was Subramanya Bharati, the poet laureate of Tamil Nadu. When he went to see her, she asked him, are you married? Yes, I am married. Why you have come alone? Why you didn't bring your wife? It is not the custom to bring wife to see great persons. No, this is something wrong. You give up this. You have to bring. Whenever you want to see me, you come with your wife. So that was her concern for women. Human beings are divine by nature and should be served by love, kindness and compassion. So, Swami Vivekananda's concept of nationalism and patriotism, Sister Nivedita's, concept of nationalism and patriotism is a combination of Desha Bhakti and Isha Bhakti. Devotion to nation and devotion to God. She may be called the fountain of Spurti, Pratibha. Yes. And she gave Matrubhumi Dikshat, I told you, to Subramanya Bharati. Yes. Now I will tell a few words about, yesterday Professor Indrani was referring to Bhupendranath Datta, the brother of Swami Vivekananda. He was running a periodical, Yugantar. As the editor, it embodied the rebellion attitude of the youth against the British. For political reasons, he was arrested. Sister Nivedita rushed to the jail. She also rushed to Bhuvaneshwari Devi. She told her, never worry mother, you will come out of the jail shortly. And she consoled Bhuvaneshwari Devi, Vivekananda's mother. Yes. Now, social life, according to Sister Nivedita, depends on conduct and restraints. Instinctive sense of obligation is the main foundation of society. The obligatory behavior displays itself in the family life and in our other civic and social institutions. What one cannot do alone could be done by associations, organizations and groups. Jagat Hitaya Cha. You know, that is the slogan of our Ramakrishna Mission. For the good of the world. Hence the need for societal elements. Association believes in working together for the benefit of nation. So, it goes like that, her social sense. And as I told you, Atmano Mokshartham Jagat Hitaya Cha, for one's own liberation and for the good of the world. That is the slogan of Ramakrishna Mission, Dhyaya Vakya. And you know, she was not simply uncritical of Hinduism. You know, she would say, around Vairagya and Mukti, dispassion and release, Hinduism rotates. Nothing worldly, nothing for the householder. See, this is the weak point of Hinduism. This reminds us of Swami Vivekananda's proclamation that he is prepared to enter into thousands of hells if that would make him serve the poor and the downtrodden and remove their suffering. So, she is fond of Vivekananda's statement, only those live who live for others. That is the statement of Vivekananda. She was very much moved by that. Only those who work for the benefit of others, only those who live. All other living is of no use. Yes. So, I have her interpretation of religion, one specimen I told you. And she was a great educationist. In 1892, she had opened a school of her own at the age of 25 in Wimbledon. Wimbledon is famous for so many things, you know. Wimbledon, such was her concern for education. She re-emphasized on character building through man-making education and spiritual power, so forcefully advocated by Swami Vivekananda. Like her teacher Vivekananda, she stood for science-religion nexus in education. Even after 150 years, she holds this way in the field of education, in the field of religion, in the field of patriotism, and so on. Yes. So this in brief is about Sister Nivedita's humanistic interpretation of Swami Vivekananda. If I have erred in my presentation, I desire to be corrected. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sheshagiri Rao. Now we have had, may I have 10 minutes of discussion? Achha, okay. And with the permission of the Maharaja, the Maharaj, see, I won't be here during the afternoon. I have to go elsewhere. So with your permission, may I just present a few of my questions here to Professor Bhattacharya. Just not so much of question. Yeah.
Just I have got not a question. Maybe just now he mentioned that if I have erred, please correct.
Oh yeah, please do.
There was,
please
I think, there was one factual error, perhaps.
Yeah, please correct it.
Swami Vivekananda never gave sannyas to Sister Nivedita. He gave only brahmacharya diksha, maybe out of slip of tongue or something he has uttered, okay. And we would like to correct this. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So, as I told Maharaj, just a minute, due to some prior appointments fixed much earlier, I cannot be here this afternoon in the interactive session. I have to go. So, if you kindly permit me, I will just state one or two things in connection with Professor Bhattacharya's paper. I don't have much to say about Professor Sheshagiri Rao. Much has been discussed about Nivedita, and I have nothing new to add. Now, my brief observations will be, first of all, one thing, that Akasha and Voma cannot perhaps be translated as space. I don't know how to translate Akasha. Many people have preferred to retain it as a Sanskrit term because you see space comes closer to dik or desha. And dik or desha is supposed to explain, to account for our perceptions or knowledge of distance, direction, and so on. Whereas akasha is there to explain the phenomenon of sound. It is supposed to be the substratum of sound. I don't know whether anybody ever considered the space to be the substratum of sound. This is one thing. Second thing is that there was one point about eating of flesh and drinking of wine in sacrifices. Now that did happen in some cases, like flesh used to be eaten in the Nirula Pashubandha yagas and Som yagas. But so far as Ishti yagas are concerned, like Darshapurnamasa, or homas like Agnihotra, no animals were ever killed in these things, nor was any wine used in it. And Soma is not exactly wine, it is a juice of a creeper mixed with milk. But in Sautramani, obviously, Sura had to be prepared and sanctified and offered. That's just one thing. One more thing, he referred to two Kambalas, Kambala Ashvatara and Adita Kesha Kambali. This is just a bit of information that in one commentary on the Kavyadarsha of Dandin, I came across by a Buddhist from Sinhala. He quotes a verse from one Bodhacharya who was called Kambala. And the verse is very beautiful. I think you will enjoy it. That where he says that a blind person is to be preferred to a person who is suffering from glaucoma. Because the blind one knows that he cannot see. He is not proud. But the man suffering from glaucoma, he can see the sun and he is not prepared to accept that he cannot see many things. And the verse is beautiful. Yaha sarvathandha timirahatascha tayor varang purvaka eva nunam andhoham asmi tyavalepa shunya la bhanudriktaiviniko nibhani. Just by way of information. And last thing, now it is perhaps a tradition in Marxist-Leninist thinking to just have two camps, materialism and idealism. And that often puts so many things under one rubric, idealism, which doesn't quite appeal to us because we find it very inconvenient to treat Nyaya, Yogachara Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta all as brands of idealism. This is too much to stomach. I don't know what to say, but for example, you see, the Naiyayikas tried their level best to show that there are external objects, there are individual souls, and so on. And their role of God in it was minimal. And the last thing is that even the Mimamsakas did not think that every sentence in the Vedas is authoritative in the sense that it is to be taken in a literal sense. Because even for them, only the injunctions in the Brahmana texts, like Vidhi and Nishedha, they were to be taken in a literal sense, unless you see compelled very much. Unless there were defects like Vakka Veda and other things, they have to be understood literally. You see, Shabara has a dictum in his Shabara Bhashya, Na vidhahu para shabdartha. But so far as the Arthavada sentence is concerned, they say that, well, we have to adopt Lakshana, and you see, in the case of Vidhi, the Arthavada simply means that the enjoined act is something good. In the case of Nishedha, the prohibited act is something bad. Nothing more is to be said. Yesterday, I think Professor Shamiran Chandra Chakraborty made this point amply clear when he explained that verse, Yamimang Pushpitang Vacham Pravadanti, and so on. And that would be all from my side. And now if you have any questions, there are still 5 or 6 minutes left. So if there are pointed questions, I invited them from the audience. I'm sorry for encroaching on your time.
So I have a question for Professor Rao. I was trying to relate to his topic to what you were saying. And he did speak about Sister Nivedita's use of science for her humanism. But apart from that, I really couldn't find any salient features of Sister Nivedita's reappraisal of Sister Nivedita's humanistic approach in accordance to Swami Vivekananda. So within the time permitted, I mean, could you just give a few sentences about the salient features of your topic, I mean, in brief?
When I said she made use of science, I said it in the sense of rationalism. Science is rationalistic in that sense. Now humanism, you want me to summarize what exactly was your question, Professor Chakravarti?
Point out a few salient features. You mentioned about the use of science as part of our humanism. But apart from that, I'm afraid I didn't get any other point where I could take away points which I could say.
What I mean is, Vivekananda, when he was, he made use of the knowledge of the contemporary scientists. You see, I forget the names of some scientists. Now, I mean to say that influenced Sister Nivedita. Not that she went to a lab and did this and did that, and hence she made use of science to popularize humanism. Not in that sense.
Sir, I have a question.
Please.
I would like to ask Professor Bhattacharya. Sir, you refer to certain early Nuyayikas, who were Nirishwaravadis, who were atheists, and who were they? Just a small query.
I think he didn't use the word atheist. He said there was no role for God.
No role for God. And who were they, sir?
In the Nyaya Sutras, I think that was his point, that there is one sutra, Ishvara Karanam and so on, which is not accepted. Ishvara as the Upadana Karana or something like that. But that was not accepted.
It was only in the Nyaya Vaisheshika tradition that God became a focal point. In the older Nyaya tradition, there is no room for God, neither in the Nyaya Sutra nor in Bhakshayana's Bhashya.
But Ishvara is admitted as one of the opponents.
It's much later.
No, he is not accepted as a Padartha. In the list of Padarthas, there is no Ishvara.
No.
It's not Padartha, but he has admitted Atman, and Atman is can either be Jivatman and Paramatman.
No.
Atman is the 12th pronoun.
Yes.
Well, that is why Nyaya is an idealist philosophy. So also there is Pratyabhava. There is a question of rebirth. That makes Nyaya, in this broad division, too broad, I admit, between idealism and materialism. That's why a parallel division has been made between
non-materialist.
Idealism
non-materialist.
and non-realist. No, idealism and realism. That is also another distinction.
Right.
And there is immaterialism and materialism. And as I said, both Lenin and Lukács made exceptions to this broad generalization. They wanted to have room for agnosticism and another parallel polarity, as we called it, between rationalist and non-rationalist or irrationalist philosophy. As to Professor Prabal Kumar Sen's, my old friend, observations, may I say a few words?
Yep, sure. I'd like to.
First, I admit that the translation space for Akasha or Bomo is inadequate. But since it has been used generally, even by Jacobi and some such scholars, I don't think that the difference in context would make it clear where space stands for Desha and where space stands for Akasha. After all, there are polysemous words. The same word can be used in two or more than two different senses. It is all the context that matters. As to both the names Kombolo and Oshotoro, there were also some musicologists of this name. And the two names, Oshotoro and Kombolo, are both rather, to us nowadays, odd. But they came out as names. As in Kashmir there was a name Udbhato. Now to the Bengalis particularly, Udbhato means absurd. But that was a common proper name in Kashmir. Any word ending with to for a name.
Rudrata, Mammata, Lollata.
There are so many. In the Rajatarangini you will find a dozen. So such names, however odd they may seem nowadays, were quite acceptable in those days. I said Ashotara and Kambala, these two words.
Okay. I have the mic, sir. Can I just ask a question very quickly? Professor Bhattacharya, given what you said about the Mimamsakas, from their interpretation of the Vedas, could you derive a kind of a naturalism from that? That's one question. In other words,
yes.
There are of course the Devatas are just nothing more than effervescent beings that come out of mantras and so forth. So there's one reading of the Vedas could actually lead to, and of course, putting aside the Upanishads, the Samhitas, Aranyakas, Vedangas, we shouldn't forget them, and the Brahmanas, of course. There is really no overarching supernatural thesis. That's one thing. Second, the kind of another kind of materialism that comes out of the West, especially from Australia, is central state materialism, where all mental states are simply just reduced to brain states. So there is no, there's no way in which one talks about the Cartesian mind any longer. That kind of materialism is kind of hard to find in Indian philosophy, except perhaps in Nyaya, where the Manas is part of the Deha, part of the body itself, perhaps even the Antakarana, and so on. But of course, there is always an Atman or something underneath that, but that's not sort of so central in terms of the functional account of the mind. Would you acknowledge that as a kind of materialism that predates Western central state materialism?
I think Professor late lamented Hemanta Kumar Gangopadhyay would have answered these questions better. He had dealt with Mimamsa from a new point of view, where many rational elements have been found, and he had a paper also on the rational and irrational in the Mimamsa. As to the other questions, I would remind you of the caveat made by Professor Amita Chatterjee. Is she here?
No, she
No.
can't find.
She, in her article on naturalism in Indian philosophy, in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, had issued a very significant caveat that European terms, naturalism, mental naturalism, etc., should not be appeared to gel with the same kind of terms in Indian philosophy. Shobhavavado cannot be translated as naturalism. I myself prefer to use the word Shobhavavado itself, because the concept of science, the concept of understanding, the concept of nature in the European tradition and the Indian tradition are not alike. There are similarities, but they are not identical. The words cannot be replaced by any English or French or German words. So whether we can find something materialistic in other philosophical systems, again, this is a matter of point of view, I would say. The Europeans nowadays, the Americans also, prefer two other words for materialism. One is naturalism and the other is elementalism. Now these terms again represent something akin to what was called Bhutovada or Dehatmavada or Bhuta Chaitanyavada, but again they are not identical. So let us stop at there.
How did Prabodha Chandrodaya? In that there is mention of materialism.
Yes, but that's a play, you see,
Yes,
and
play.
play with exaggerated sarcasms.
The Professor Boydha has a question for you.
Yes.
Just to throw some light on this problem, that this Western model, for example, realism, idealism, when it comes to nature of mathematics, mathematical entities, we have logicism, intuitionism, formalism. When it comes to materialism, non-materialism, none of them will fit in describing some of the theories of our systems. For example, in the case of Nyaya, all the books I know of in English, they have written as realism. But it is not exactly the realism we found in Western Hemisphere. It is totally different type, especially when things are created by apeksha buddhi and different entities come out of apeksha buddhi as a causal condition, but it is external over there. Same thing with respect to numbers higher than 1. Interpretation is such that they depend on mind, apeksha buddhi, ganana roop apeksha buddhi. There are different types of apeksha buddhi. Even when I say this one is tall, it also depends on some criterion of tallness. So I compare with it. And you can say, if you have different criteria, you can say, no, not this is not tall. So there is scope for disagreement. At the same time, we do not say, I am right, you are wrong. This is a peculiar feature of some of the systems of Indian philosophy. Same thing with respect to Shankar system. We cannot say that it is materialist, or it is idealist, or it is material, non-material, because this implicit thing coming out through causal interaction. So these categories, I am a bit, apprehensive of these categories. Same thing with political philosophy, with moral philosophy, dharma. All these translations are totally misleading because we are imposing Western categories on Indian systems for interpretation. They are not to be interpreted in that way. Rather, we require explanation of what is dharma, what is philosophy, what is number, and so on, in their unique way, so that we can point out that Western model does not work, and thereby we can enlighten Western philosophers that here we come across, in the term of Russell, new animals in our zoo.
I think Professor Vaidya had a question. Let us have his question.
Yeah, I just
have the answer altogether.
I want to continue on this point because I'm largely getting massively confused. So the technique that I'm familiar with, but forget about where it comes from, is we define a similarity relation, we define a relevance relation, and we define a consequence relation. We don't need the terms materialism, idealism, or any of them. What we need are the substantive logical and ontological commitments or epistemic commitments that come across. That you do across languages, as semanticists regularly do, similarity, relevance, and consequence. So, I mean, in a lot of these cases, yeah, of course these Western concepts don't graft over, or Indian concepts don't graft over the other way. But that doesn't mean that if you go to another level, you drop the term realism and go to, for example, the specific account of realism in a specific view and define the similarity relation, define the consequence relation, define the relevance relation. You can't get an answer. I don't see an argument coming that touches that point. I see a higher level argument that says, yeah, this general term realism, which no one's really defined in any more detail, doesn't fit in this context, and this term in Sanskrit that is defined this way in Sanskrit doesn't fit over here. Yeah, of course that's a problem, but isn't there an obvious way to make progress by similarity, relevance, and consequence?
Shall I answer? Look, all comparisons, it is said, is odious.
What?
All comparisons are odious.
Odious.
They smell, because whenever you compare two systems, you will always find some points of similarity and at the same time some points of dissimilarity.
Yeah.
But when you compare religions, when you compare philosophy, when you compare literature, comparative literature is a discipline well accepted, comparative religion is an accepted discipline, there you have to keep in mind both the points of similarity and dissimilarity. So any kind of identification or equation between, say, materialism and Dhyatmavada should be taken with a customary pinch of salt. There will be some difference in understanding.
You're missing the point. The point is not that the point is that at a lower level of description, not at the higher level, you can define the similarity relation, the relevance relation, and the entailment relation. So I'm not understanding how that could be the relevant response. I don't see how telling me that there are always comparisons and always similarities and dissimilarities. That's not the issue. The issue is that you can define a similarity relation to map it across. How are you falsifying that point?
No. when you present your system of philosophy to a foreigner, you have to take into account his understanding of his terms and then make your point clear that this is where it agrees and this is where it differs. That's all.
If I may just say one thing here, and then the last question will be from Professor Sati Chatterjee. I think it was Arjuna was someone who said that when you try to say something to a lecture, you have to use the lecture bhasha. Otherwise, you can't communicate. That is the basic problem. What can you do? So, the last question from Professor Chatterjee.
It's not a question, but a comment rather.
Okay.
Well, listening to this discourse, I was thinking that it's natural in a cross-cultural dialogue situation. For culture is something definitive. Culture defines our language, our vocabulary, etc. So, whenever we are placing the Indian or the Eastern side by side with the Western, we have to keep in mind the difference in culture, the inevitable differences, shades of differences in the use of the idiom. It is a difference in idiom. Century-old, millennia-old experience waits at the back of the formation of the phrasing or the formation of the language, the vocabulary, the technical vocabulary, etc. And there is no question of imposing one thing on another. I believe comparative studies should be just placing things side by side. As Professor Bodhu pointed out, it is just noting the similarities and the dissimilarities as well. Because all is part of the history of human thought, and this is witnessing the journey of the human mind, and I believe that matters more than the translations, the process of translation, etc. We cannot translate, as Zimmer has noted much earlier. We cannot borrow either gods or phrases like that. Thank you.
So I think now we can bring this session to a close. I thank sincerely both the speakers as well as the members of the audience for making this such a lively session. I think we now break for lunch. If there is any announcement to be made, Professor Chatterjee will make them.
Yeah, we will break for lunch and we will reassemble here at 2:15.